Welcome back to the Dershow. Lots of developments over the weekend. We have a week and a day until the election, too close to call. Bettors think it's Trump, pollsters aren't sure. We're going to have to wait and see. I don't think we're going to know. And now a court said, I think it was Virginia, can count ballots received even 3 days after the election. So it's conceivable we won't know. I think we will. I suspect we will. I suspect as soon as we know, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona and a few others, we'll know who's probably won the Electoral College, but we can't absolutely be sure. Well, over the weekend, Israel pulled off a spectacular bombing of Iran. They sent 100 planes, and every single one of them returned safely. They fired their rockets not from Iran. That is, they were flying over another country, probably Iraq, or maybe over some international waters, but they were able to fire rockets from planes outside of the airspace of Iran and to destroy a great deal of its drone making capacity, rocket making capacity, and also its ability to protect from future Israeli raids. I think it sent a very powerful message to Iran. If you retaliate strongly and really try to kill Israelis, as you have twice before, this time Israel may go after the nuclear facilities and the oil facilities, and they've proved they can do it without much defense by the Iranians, even with the help of Russia. They didn't shoot down a single plane. I'm not even sure they got off a shot at a single plane. It sends a very powerful message to a number of sources. One, to Iran: we know you're a paper tiger, that you are not as strong as you had led others to believe. It sent a powerful message to the United States that even despite leaks by Americans, who knows who it was, it could be anybody ranging from, lower ranking officials to higher ranking officials in the Biden administration, that Israel will do what it has to do. And I've always suspected, I mentioned on the show, that a deal was made, that I think Netanyahu made a deal with the Biden administration, that it would not this time attack the Iranian nuclear and oil facilities, but that if Iran retaliated in a strong way, they would then go after those facilities and the United States would not stop them. That's my speculation about the deal. I spoke to a former Top Gun pilot, navigator in the Israeli Air Force, who seems to know everything about everything. And he gave me some good insights into what was happening. But the most remarkable thing, it rarely happens, is that 100 planes, different kinds of planes, F-25, F-16s, whatever, all sent on a very dangerous, precarious mission, 2,000 kilometers away from Israel. That's, the distance between New York and Miami Beach. They did it with no consequences, with every single plane returning. Very, very powerful, very, very influential. It will send a message not only to the people I've mentioned, but also to the Saudis. Saudis admire strength, and Israel has shown strength. Israel did something else today. They voted to kick UNRWA out of Israel. Thank God for that. That's the right thing to do, even though the United States said you shouldn't do it. UNRWA is a wholly owned subsidiary of Hamas, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran. UNRWA is a corrupt organization. Many people from UNRWA are Hamas supporters, and some are Hamas operatives. And there's just no reason why Israel has to give immunity, and why the United States has to give immunity. The United States gives immunity to UNRWA officials, even those who may have participated in the October 7th massacres. And that's wrong. UNRWA should not exist. It's the only refugee organization that's limited to one group of refugees. The Palestinians. There's no group for the 800 or so thousand Jewish refugees, which are probably now 2 million, who were forced out of Arab countries in 1948, 1967, and other periods of time. There's no refugee agency for for Germans who were forced out of Sudetenland, or for Pakistanis and Indians who were forced out of each other's countries. Only the Palestinians get a special agency, and that agency has been infiltrated and corrupted by terrorists. So I'm glad Israel made the decision, and I wish the United States would support it instead of opposing it, but the United States is opposing it. So let's turn to the subject at hand. I went to an opera performance last night, a phenomenal performance, the Richard Tucker Memorial Concert. Every year, I knew Richard Tucker. He was the greatest tenor in the Metropolitan Opera when I was growing up and going to the opera all the time. And his son Barry now runs it, and so we get invited every year. And we had great seats, right, in, sixth row, and listened to some of these amazing, amazing young singers. As I was leaving, a woman came over to me and said, "How come you're here? You should be at the Trump rally in Madison Square Garden. Why aren't you there? Why aren't you speaking? Why aren't you supporting Trump?" And I said, "Look, I'm not a Trump political supporter. I don't go to Trump rallies. And boy, am I glad I didn't go, because I would have walked out. It was disgusting." That comedian who got up there and talked about an island of garbage in the middle of the ocean, and it's called Puerto Rico. Hey, a lot of my friends are from Puerto Rico. They love Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is part of the United States of America. That's saying Brooklyn is an island of garbage, or San Francisco, or Charleston, South Carolina. You can't have a comedian. I don't care how unfunny he was, and he wasn't funny, but you can't have a comedian sponsored by a political event who talks about the entire island of Puerto Rico being a place of garbage. It's one of the most beautiful places in America, akin to Hawaii in so many different ways. It's had its problems, obviously. It's had storms. It's right in the storm belt. And many people from Puerto Rico had to leave and go to Florida. But they are us. We are them. They are as American as we are. They get to exercise American. Sure, it's statutory citizenship, not constitutional citizenship, but someday it may be constitutional citizenship. Doesn't matter. They are Americans, and I would have walked out on that. Comedian. He also made some, nasty comments about other ethnicities. The Times said he made anti-Semitic comments. I didn't think so. What he said was, it wasn't funny either. He said the Palestinians and the Israelis, they ought to resolve this thing by playing that, game, rock, scissors, paper. And of course, the Palestinians will throw rocks. Ha 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 ha. Funny. All right, not so. But the Israelis will have trouble throwing paper. Did he mean they'll have trouble because paper is money or paper is science? It was not funny. It was stupid, and it may have stereotyped, but it wasn't anti-Semitic. I wouldn't have walked out on a joke like that. I would have walked out on him because he wasn't a funny comedian, but I wouldn't do that. But what was appalling, what was so appalling, I'm glad I didn't go. I watched replays of it on television. But what is appalling is my friend Hillary Clinton, who I've known for years and years and years, and MSNBC comparing this rally in Madison Square Garden to the Nazi rally of 1939, which featured Nazis, real Nazis, doing Heil Hitler salutes, wearing swastikas, calling for the end of Jews. 1939, that was after Kristallnacht. We all knew what the Nazis were about. The Holocaust hadn't yet begun, but the shootings had begun. Jews had already been killed, probably 1 million of them, of the 6 million, were already dead in 1939. And these Nazis were parading down the street I live on. It's called York Avenue. Yorkville was Germantown. And 20,000 Nazis filled the stadium praising Hitler. That's not what happened last night. And shame on you, Hillary, and shame on you, MSNBC. MSNBC actually interspliced recordings of the Nazi 1939 event with the event of yesterday to create an impression, as if the only events that ever occurred in Madison Square Garden were the Hitler 1939 and this last night. Bill Clinton was nominated in Madison Square Garden. John Kennedy spoke there. I've spoken in Madison Square Garden. I spoke at the City University Baruch School graduation. Um, every performer has spoken and performed in Madison Square Garden. Don't make those analogies. And calling Donald Trump Hitler and calling people who attended the rally last night Nazis is a form of Holocaust denial. What it basically says is Holocaust wasn't so bad. It was just like, the event of last night. It was people telling bad jokes, springtime for Hitler. No, the Holocaust wasn't about jokes. It wasn't about stereotypes. It was about putting babies in gas chambers and killing 1 million of them and killing 6 million innocent Jews who weren't even involved in the war, just taking them out and putting them in gas chambers. But when you compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, what you're saying is there were no gas chambers, there were no shooting squads, there was no Holocaust, there were no killings. The Holocaust was, a leader making speeches that you don't like. I don't like a lot of what Donald Trump says. I didn't like his ban on people from some countries that were majority Muslim countries. It wasn't a Muslim ban, but it was wrong in my view, and I criticized it then. I didn't like what Tucker Carlson said. I didn't like what so many other people said yesterday. But boy, that's a far cry from saying the people who listened, even the people who applauded, even the people who uttered those words are Nazis. No, they're not Nazis. Nazis are unique. And you just can't go around calling people Nazis and Hitler without diminishing what actually happened between 1941, particularly, and 1944-45. That was the height of the genocide. And you can't call what Israel is doing genocide without becoming a Holocaust denier either. Israel is acting in self-defense and killing as few civilians as possible, saving as many as possible, sending them to hospitals and curing them, including Sinwar, who was treated by an Israeli doctor and saved. That's not what happens in a genocide. And so we just have to watch our language. I'm not talking about political correctness. I'm just talking about common sense and historical accuracy. The Holocaust was unique. Nazism was unique. Hitler was unique. Let's not trivialize the uniqueness of those horrors that are incomparable to anything that's happening today. Now, I've used one analogy, and I'm proud of the analogy I use. I have called the young people, 19, 20, 21-year-old students at Harvard and at other universities who are blocking Jewish students from going to class and who are calling Jews genocidal and trying to harass them and prevent them from getting an education. I've compared them to the Hitler Youth of the early 1930s, way before the Holocaust, talking about 1933, 1934, before Jews were being killed. What I compared them to was people who were supporters of Nazism and anti-Semites and people who attacked Jews and wouldn't allow them to go to class. That's an appropriate comparison. But to compare them to the ultimate Hitler, the Hitler of 1944 and 1945, or to the Nazis of 1941 through 3, 4, 5, is ridiculous. People know so little about history. The other thing they complained about was somebody said that he heard him say that he wished he had Hitler's generals. First of all, I doubt that Trump ever said that. Second of all, you don't want Hitler's generals. Hitler's generals try to kill Hitler. Hitler had to kill some of his generals, including some of the best generals. The generals were soldiers. Some of them were quite good. Rommel, you know how he ended up. And so people just throw around words like that. They have no idea of historical context or historical meaning. They talk about ethnic cleansing in Israel. The only ethnic cleansing that have occurred in Arab countries, where Jordan ethnically cleansed itself of all Jews. You can't come to Jordan and own a piece of property if you're Jewish. In Saudi Arabia, there are roads that are reserved only for Muslims. Not so in Israel. In Israel, there are roads reserved for Israeli citizens, but they could be Arabs, they could be black, they could be white, they could be of any religion. They're Israeli citizens. There are roads for citizens and roads for people who are not citizens and who are not subject to the general social contract with a country. That's very, very, very different. So this use of the Hitler analogy, this use of the Nazi analogy, and it's predominantly by Democrats against Republicans. And the Democrats are saying that if Trump's elected, it will be the end of democracy. Well, I worry. I worry about some of the things that Trump has said, and I'm concerned that if he's elected, he will try to implement some of them. But he's not putting people in death camps. He's not putting them on death marches. He's not creating shooting squads. No, he's being tough on immigration, tougher than I would be. I'd like to see a policy which encourages immigration. I don't like the fact that he calls certain countries shithole countries and other countries good countries. By the way, Franklin Delano Roosevelt did exactly the same thing when he was told that we would be accepting people from Italy. He wanted to know whether they were from northern Italy, which is really good people because they're northern Italian, they're practically German or Austrian, or were they southern Italian from Sicily and from Palermo. He made racial distinctions and racist comments like that. Woodrow Wilson was an overt a racist. Racism has been part of, unfortunately, the legacy of the Democratic Party. And when I was growing up, there were the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, many of whom were racist. And the Republicans were under Eisenhower, but then the Democrats under Kennedy were supportive of the civil rights movement. It's a mixed legacy. You can't attribute all bad things to one party or the other party. McCarthyism, the old McCarthyism, Republicans. The new McCarthyism, Democrats. I'm worried much more about the future of democracy under radical Democrats than under centrist Republicans. The Democrats who would be influential in a Harris presidency would include the squad, AOC and Tlaib and all those bigots and anti-Semites and racists. And there are plenty of them among the Democrats. And I want to see them marginalized. And electing Democrats to the Senate and the House won't marginalize them. I'm not indicating who I'm voting for, but I will certainly split my votes. I'm not going to vote along party lines. I'm no longer a Democrat. I'm an independent, and I will vote for whichever candidate for any particular office I think is best. And I will not even look at whether there's a D or an R next to their name. I assure you, I won't vote for anybody who's from Jill Stein's party or any other radical, anarchist, communist, socialist party. But as between Democrats and Republicans, I'm going to pick and choose. I'm not going to vote party line. I'm not going to vote for people just because they belong to a party. And I'm not going to take into account who's going to control the House or the Senate. But that's part of democracy. That's part of democracy. Whoever gets more people seated in the House and the Senate controls them. And that's good. That's the way it should be. I generally root for a divided legislature. I generally much prefer a legislature in which one house is one party and the other house is the other party, because I'm afraid of government, big government. Our Constitution was written for inefficiency, not efficiency. If we wanted an efficient Constitution, very easy. Just replicate the country we just revolted from. England had a unitary system. a House of Lords and a House of Commons, but mostly in those days, the House of Commons, and no system of checks and balances. We have the exact opposite. We have a very different parliament and a very different way of electing parliament in our House of Representatives. And we have a tripartite system of government, a powerful, powerful executive, unlike Great Britain, which doesn't. It has a prime minister. A prime minister is simply the prime minister of the parliament. That's not the case with the United States. We were built for inefficiency. The framers of our Constitution said, when in doubt, don't do it. Hesitate, wait, don't rush. We're making it harder to pass a law. It has to get passed by both houses and has to be signed by the president, or there has to be enough votes to overcome, and it has to be constitutional, and the courts have to uphold it. So, we have such a wonderful system of checks and balances. It's designed to protect against tyranny. It's not designed to make things easy for any particular party or any particular government. And we've done a great job for 200 and, we're going to live to see many of you, the 250th anniversary of the most enduring constitution in the history of the world, the U.S. Constitution, which I study and revere and criticize. That's what the framers endowed to us. It's a constitution we are expounding, as Chief Justice John Marshall said. This is a letter. This is a handwritten letter from John Marshall with his picture. He's one of my heroes. As you know, I collect letters and collect all kinds of things. A little hard to read, but he was a great man. But a flawed man. His views on slavery, his views on other issues are not something to be commendable. He was, as you probably know, Thomas Jefferson's cousin. They didn't get along. Jefferson was an anti-federalist. Marshall was a federalist, and so. But we've had party systems. I just bought an early copy of George Washington's farewell address, where he rails against the party system and says that the country will never survive a party system, that the parties just are selfish, and everybody ought to be interested just in the United States. I go back and I read things like that from time to time, just to remind me of the original meanings of our Constitution. So please, let's stop using Nazi analogies, except when they're absolutely irrelevant. Stop comparing our political candidates to Hitler. Stop comparing people who go to political events to Nazis, or to people who went to the 1939 Nazi event in the garden. I think we're smart enough not to fall for that kind of name calling or rhetoric. Okay, let's look at some letters. It's fascinating to watch Dersh make arguments implicitly for Trump and against the Biden-Harris administration day after day and still not come out for Trump. And I believe he has not made up his mind. Goodness, human nature is fascinating. It is. It's fascinating. It's very, very difficult. There are strong arguments against both candidates, and there are arguments probably in favor of both candidates. And anybody with a complex mind should not find it easy to cast a vote in this particular election. And I'm part of that group. 100% private corporations have to be 100% transparent with zero protection of its system when it comes to electronic voting machines. That's what I said. That's what I wrote in the brief. And that's what the 65 Project is coming after me and calling for the Massachusetts bar to discipline me for saying that. I don't think it's going to happen. But that's what's happening with the 65 Project. The single most undemocratic mechanism in today's political world, all attributable to the Democrats and to the Biden-Harris support system. So I want to talk about democracy, talk about Project 65, the most McCarthyite, undemocratic thing I have seen in my adult life, and I'm fighting it tooth and nail. This is an interesting question. It's about the Middle East. Why did Britain get the freedom to draw up lines in the Middle East after the Second World War? It was after the First World War, but the point's the same. Why can't Israel do the same after they win the war against Iranian Ottoman Empire? And then it goes on and on and on. But the only reason we have a country called Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, it's all colonialism. It's all settler colonialism. It's all the things that the left rails against. Israel is the only one of those countries that exists because of its self-determination. It built its own country. It built kibbutzim. It built moshavim. It cleared the deserts. It cleared the mosquito-infested swamps. It built its own country. It didn't depend on colonialism. It's the most anti-colonialist country in the Middle East. Indeed, it may be one of the only anti-colonialist countries in the Middle East. It just shows you how people turn truth on their head in the interests of bigoted lies, which is what you hear about Israel all the time. My new book, the book about Israel, the 10 big anti-Israel lies, is about to be published. It will be published in the next few days, and we're trying to circulate it. Elon, different book. This is not Get Trump. It's the book about the 10 lies. It will be published in the next couple of days, and we have very great ambitions for it. We are literally trying to get this little book. It's less than 100 pages, soft cover, small. We're trying to get it to 1 million people, mostly students in high schools, in colleges, in law schools, in medical schools. And we've had some pretty generous donors helping with the costs of getting this to 1 million students. And if any of you want to help out, we'll create a website and you can tell us how you can help get this pamphlet to your own college, to where you went to school, to where your children are going to school. It would be very, very helpful. This is a good question. Were you pleased by the decision of the Australian government to disallow Candace Owens to travel to the country? Do you view it as suppression of free speech? Being allowed into a country has nothing to do with free speech these days. Candace Owens can speak on the internet. She can do Zooms, but she doesn't have to be let into the country. A country has the right to keep out bigots and to keep out anti-Semites. And Australia is within its right in doing so. It would not be within its right to prevent Australians from hearing her. She has the right to express her bigotry, just like these Hitler Youth who are calling Israel by blood libels, genocidal, and etc. They have the right to express their hate speech, and we have the right to turn them off and not to listen to them, but we wouldn't have the right to ban them from coming into our country or to throw them out of the country. And so we live in a complex world, and I'm a complex person, and I take my votes very, very, very seriously. And it's for me, as you know, these are not easy decisions. As I've said before, if I were a conservative by nature and pro-Israel as I am, it'd be an easy vote for me. And if Trump didn't say some of the things he said, it would be an easy vote for me. If I were anti-Israel and a liberal, I'm a liberal, but not anti-Israel, the vote would be easy for me. But, as a liberal who supports Israel, who hates the Squad, who hates bigotry, and it's difficult. Don't fault me for being complex. That's who I am. And I'm old enough to deserve to be complex. I've lived a long and complex life. We'll continue to talk about these issues for the next couple of days. And then next week, we'll be on Election Day. Can't wait. See you then.